On a quiet autumn afternoon, the small garden behind the old house was bathed in pale yellow sunlight. The dry leaves rustled under their feet, and the gentle breeze blew by, carrying the familiar scent of heaven and earth. On an old rattan chair, an old man with gray hair was sitting quietly. He wore a thin sweater, and his thin hands gripped an old handkerchief. The scarf, embroidered with faded threads, but still sophisticated, stands out with a carefully embroidered name. The old man sat there. His eyes seemed to sink into a distant sky, where memories were full. In the corner of the yard, his nephew, a boy about 12 years old, was playing with some dried leaves. He looked at him, his eyes curious, then stood up and walked closer. "Grandpa, whose scarf does that towel belong to?" The boy's clear voice rang out, breaking the silence of the afternoon. The old man was startled, and slightly bent down to look at the towel in his hand. A smile appeared on the old face, but then quickly disappeared, replaced by a sad look. He didn't answer right away, just gently caressing the towel, each finger trembling as if tracing every thread, every familiar line of a bygone era. The boy sat down on the steps near him, his big round eyes shining brightly, waiting for an answer. After a while, the old man took a deep breath, as if gathering all his strength to say, "This is your mother's scarf, who you will never forget in your life, is also the same person with whom you made a very big mistake." His voice was quiet, choked up, as if every word encapsulated a whole sky of regret. The boy tilted his head, his eyebrows furrowed, and his expression was full of curiosity. "What did you do wrong to your mother?" he asked, his voice a little apprehensive, as if afraid of touching his pain. The old man smiled faintly, but that smile could not hide the sadness in his deep eyes. He leaning back in a rattan chair, his eyes looking up at the sky, where the sunlight was shining through the foliage. At that time, he was young and bubbly. He did not understand his mother's love and sacrifice. "You have said words that you wish you could withdraw all your life." The old man paused, held up the scarf, and his eyes stared intently at each embroidery, as if there was still an image of his mother in it. The boy was silent, his tiny hands on his knees, his eyes listening intently. The old man turned to look at him, his hand resting lightly on his shoulder, and his voice was hoarse but warm. "You know, there are mistakes that cannot be corrected. Therefore, never let those who love you be sad." After speaking, the old man looked at the horizon again, as if to relive a painful memory. The boy sat close to him, resting his head on his arm, without saying a word. And then, he began to tell, slowly, word for word, a story that he had been hiding for a long time. The old man began to speak, his voice lowering, as if every word was dragging him back to a turbulent past. At that time, he was the eldest son in a poor family. His father died early, his mother carried the whole family alone, raising him and his two younger siblings. The mother is not only the caregiver but also the only pillar. Early in the morning, my mother got up before the chickens crowed, worked hard in the field, and then came home to take care of every meal and every set of clothes for the children. He paused for a moment, his eyes glimpsed with deep regret. "My mother always taught him to study hard, to live responsibly. But do you know, when you are young, people often think that you are right, think that your mother is too strict." So did he. He didn't realize that his mother's strictness was because he wanted to be good to him. The boy sat still, his eyes wide open, listening to every word. The old man continued, his voice deep and sad, "That day, you had a big dream. He wants to become a musician, wants to go far to pursue his passion. But his mother disagreed. My mother wanted him to finish his studies, he wanted him to have a stable career to help his family. He refused to understand. You think your mother is getting in your way, tying you up. The old man sighed slightly, his eyes seemed to see the image of the unruly young man that day. Then one day, he had an argument with his mother. That day, he had just received a big opportunity, a friend invited him to the city to join a band. He excitedly ran to the journalist house with his mother, but his mother just shook her head. You can't go anywhere, she said. I still have to learn. Don't dream in vain. The old man's voice choked up. He was angry. He said words that he could never forget in his life. I never understood you. I just want to force you. I always think you have to do what you want. I don't need to worry about you anymore. Then he left. I didn't see my mother's tears at the time, but now that I think about it, I know she cried a lot. The boy looked up, his eyes drooping. Then what's next, sir? The old man smiled faintly, but in that smile there was only sadness. He left, went to the city with all the excitement of youth. But success did not come immediately. In the early days, he lived hard, doing odd jobs and trying to pursue his dreams. From time to time, he missed home, missed his mother, but his arrogance did not allow him to return. He thought he had to prove to his mother that he could live well without her. He lowered his head, his trembling hands gripping the handkerchief. But when he started to have some success, when he realized he was able to go back to filial piety, his mother was no longer well. When he received the news that his mother was seriously ill, he hurried back. But my mother was just a thin, weak woman lying on a hospital bed. I still smile when I see you, I forgive you, even though you don't deserve it. He paused, his voice choked up. On the day I left, I still held this scarf in my hand. This was the only gift my mother had embroidered for him before he left. He kept it as a reminder that there are mistakes that never have a chance to be corrected. The boy sat quietly close to him, holding the old man's hand. Grandpa, I will never make you so sad. The old man looked at him, his eyes gentle but also sad. I hope you will always remember that nothing in the world is more important than your family and the people who love you so much. The old man paused for a moment, his hazy eyes staring deeply into his nephew's immature face. These memories seemed to drain his strength, but they also made his heart more relieved. The boy still sits still, his eyes sad, but he flashes understanding. The old man put the handkerchief in his palm and gently grabbed the small hand. Grandson, he began, his voice deep but filled with deep feelings. This life is long, short is short, but there are things that when you lose them, you will never get them back. Your mother's affection for me is something that can never be replaced, never exhausted, no matter how many mistakes you make. But you must remember, do not let pride, rashness, or anger cloud your reason, so that when you realize it, it is too late. The boy lowered his head, looked at the handkerchief in his hand, his fingers gently caressing each old embroidery. You won't upset me, sir, he said, in a small but firm voice. The old man smiled slightly, a rare but warm smile. You know you're a good boy, he continued, his trembling hand rubbing his head. Always know how to appreciate what you have, especially family affection. Never hesitate to say words of love, don't let everything remain in your memory, you will feel regret. Spend time with her, care about her, and don't forget to thank her for all she has done for you. The boy looked up, his eyes shining brightly at him, as if he wanted to engrave every word of instruction. "I promise you, I will always cherish you, and I will make you proud," he said, his voice full of determination. The old man nodded, his eyes looking at him gently. "You believe me," he said quietly. Then he leaned back in his chair, his gaze towards the sunset-colored sky. A sense of serenity enveloped him. In that moment, he knew that his story and lessons had not been forgotten. The handkerchief on the boy's hand is a symbol of inheritance, of love, and a valuable lesson about family, a legacy that he wants to leave to the next generation. The sun gradually set, leaving a last trace of light in the deep blue sky, like a faint light before going out completely. The garden was now in darkness, leaving only the rustling of leaves as the wind blew through. The boy sat quietly beside him, not saying anything more, only feeling every word he said as if settled in his heart. A sense of peace and warmth spread in his heart, as if stories, lessons, had become an integral part of his life. The old man slowly stood up, although he was tired, but his eyes were full of satisfaction. He smiled at the boy, then patted him on the shoulder. "I will do it, I believe so." The boy stood up, his eyes still bright and determined. "I will always remember your words, sir." "Remember not only with words, but also with actions, son." The old man smiled, and then took him by the hand into the house. As they walked through the door, the boy turned to look one last time at the garden, the last light from the sun reflected on the towel in his hand, as a reminder of the precious lesson he had passed on. The next day, the boy was not in a hurry to run out to play as usual. He sat with his mother, asked her about the old days, listened to the stories she told. He spends more time caring for his mother, doing small things to help her, simple actions but containing sincere love. He knew that his mother's love and sacrifice were the most precious thing, and he would never let her be sad. The old man saw it all from the window, the smile on his lips was gentle. He knew that his story was not just a story, but a bridge between one generation and the next. He gave his grandson not only a lesson, but a precious spiritual legacy that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. And when the old man closed his eyes and fell asleep, in his heart, all the worries and regrets gradually dissipated, giving way to serenity. He knows that, although life is short, he has done one of the most important things, teaching the next generation to appreciate and love their families, to listen and not to let precious opportunities slip away. The story of love, sacrifice, and irreparable mistakes is finally complete. And in the dim light of the sunset, that story continues to be told, from generation to generation, so that everyone realizes